The evening the money changed hands, the sky seemed worn thin, as if it had watched too many lives be weighed and found convenient. Dust drifted through the street in slow spirals, catching the last light of day, and the town stood half awake, pretending not to notice what it always noticed. She stood near the hitching post with her hands folded at her waist, not in prayer, but in habit. Stillness had become her shield. The dress she wore had once been a hopeful color, though now it held the dull memory of it, faded by years of scrubbing and careful mending. Every stitch had been placed by her own hands. It mattered to her that something in her life showed care, even if no one else did. The man who had paid for her first shifted impatiently. He had the posture of someone accustomed to being obeyed and the eyes of someone who lost interest quickly. He looked at her as one might look at a horse that didn't match the picture promised by the seller. Not angry, just disappointed, as though she had failed him by being real. He spoke about her without speaking to her. Too quiet, too thin, not worth the trouble. His words carried no heat, which somehow made them colder. Cruelty would have at least acknowledged her humanity. This was simple dismissal. He waved a hand, turned away, and in that small gesture left her exposed to the town and to herself. People pretended to mind their business. Boots shuffled. Conversations resumed too loudly. Still, she felt their eyes brush against her, curious and satisfied, already reshaping her story into something easier to swallow. She lowered her gaze to the dirt, because meeting those looks always cost more than it gave. She told herself this was familiar. She told herself she knew how to stand through it. That was when the rancher stepped forward. He had been there all along, leaning against a post with the patience of a man who understood waiting. His clothes were plain, worn clean rather than worn thin. His hands rested easy at his sides, calloused and empty. He did not look at her body. When his eyes lifted, they settled briefly on her face, then moved on, as if acknowledging her without claiming her. He spoke to the man with the money. His voice was low, steady, unadorned. How much? The question carried no curiosity, no hunger, just fact. The answer came with a grin, meant to provoke. A price named as if daring him to flinch. The rancher did not. He reached into his coat and counted the bills one by one. The sound was soft but deliberate, each note falling like a decision that could not be undone. When the money changed hands, something in her chest tightened. The old reflex, rising up, sharp and practiced. The thought came easily as it always did, worn smooth by repetition. You paid for me. Now do it. Take what you bought. Let it be over. But he didn't look at her then either. He nodded once, not to the man, not to the crowd, but to the moment itself, as if acknowledging its weight. He turned away and started down the street. After a few steps, he stopped, as though remembering something important, and glanced back at her. You can follow if you want. There's food, a roof, no chains. That was all. No command, no promise beyond the plain truth of his words. He walked on, leaving the space between them unclaimed. She remained where she was until the town lost interest and the dust settled. No one pushed her. No one urged her. For the first time in longer than she could remember, the next step belonged to her. When she finally moved, it was not because she had nowhere else to go. It was because someone had given her the dignity of choosing. The ride out of town was quiet. The buildings thinned and then disappeared, swallowed by open land that stretched without judgment. She rode behind him, watching the measured way he guided his horse, the absence of force in his movements. Night came gently, as if the land itself preferred calm. The ranch appeared without ceremony. A modest house crouched against the wind, a single lantern glowing warm in the window. He showed her the room she could use, placed food on the table, and excused himself with a nod, closing the door softly behind him. The sound of that door settling into place felt heavier than any lock she had known. She ate slowly, waiting for expectation to arrive. It did not. The night passed without footsteps outside her door. So did the next. Her body stayed tense out of habit, but the tension found nothing to answer it. Morning brought routine rather than demands. Coffee left warming, a quiet greeting. Simple questions asked without assumption. She answered carefully at first, unused to words that were not bargaining tools. When he left for the day's work, he did not tell her what to do. The absence of instruction felt unsettling, like a language she had forgotten how to speak. She began helping anyway, sweeping, washing, small tasks done with intention. It felt dangerous to accept kindness without exchange. She needed to earn her place, even if no one asked her to. The ranch hands treated her with a cautious respect that surprised her. One older man tipped his hat each morning and spoke to her as if her presence were ordinary. A neighboring woman brought preserves and did not ask questions. No one stared. No one whispered. That, more than anything, began to loosen something tight inside her. Days layered themselves into something solid. She learned the rhythms of the ranch, the way the rancher worked until dusk and washed his hands before supper, the way he listened more than he spoke. He carried his quiet like a responsibility. When she caught him looking toward the far edge of the land, his expression held neither bitterness nor longing, but remembrance, as if honoring something that had shaped him and been allowed to rest. She waited for desire to surface, for the weight of expectation to return. Instead, there was space. So much space it frightened her. At night, she lay awake, wondering if kindness was simply a debt that collected interest, one that would come due when she least expected it. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the fields red, she stood on the porch, looking back toward the road. He joined her without comment, leaving a careful distance between them. After a long while he spoke, still facing the horizon. "You don't owe me anything." The words landed heavier than any demand ever had. She nodded because she did not yet know how to answer them. When he went inside, she stayed where she was, feeling the truth of choice settle into her bones. She could leave. She did not. That night, as she closed her door, she understood something that had been denied to her for years. Safety was not the absence of fear. It was the presence of dignity. And somewhere between that quiet house and the open land beyond it, something fragile and dangerous began to grow, asking her, gently, to believe in more. Morning came to the ranch without urgency, as if the land itself believed there was no reason to rush. Pale light slipped through the window and rested on the floor, touching the edges of the room she slept in, but never crossing into it all at once. She woke before she needed to, habit still stronger than comfort, and lay still long enough to listen for sounds that would tell her what kind of day this would be. There were none that demanded anything from her. She rose quietly and found coffee warming on the stove, a small kindness left without announcement. The rancher was already outside, moving through his work with the same measured calm she had come to recognize. He greeted her with a nod and nothing more, as if allowing her to choose how much of herself she wished to offer the day. It unsettled her, this freedom. She had learned to survive by anticipating wants, by filling silence with usefulness. Here, silence was allowed to exist. She chose her tasks carefully, taking on work that felt familiar, cleaning, sorting, mending. Each motion steadied her, anchoring her to the present. When she finished, she expected instruction, a correction, some sign that she had overstepped or misunderstood her place. Instead, he thanked her simply, as if gratitude were an ordinary thing to give. Days passed in this manner, gentle and repetitive. The ranch hand spoke to her as they would to any woman who belonged to the land, not as someone borrowed or bought. An older man told her which clouds meant rain and which were only passing through. A neighbor stopped by with jars of fruit, her gaze sharp but not unkind. No one asked where she had come from. No one tried to guess what she had been. The absence of curiosity felt like mercy. Still, she remained watchful. Kindness had fooled her before. She measured every gesture, waiting for it to tip into expectation. At night, she lay awake, rehearsing the moment when the balance would shift, and she would be reminded of the debt she carried simply by existing. It did not come. Instead, the rancher continued to offer her space, as if space itself were the point. He spoke little of himself, yet small truths surfaced in the quiet. A comment about weather that hinted at years spent reading the land. A pause at the edge of the fields that suggested memory rather than regret. He carried his past with him, but it did not lean heavily on the present. She noticed how he never stood too close, how he never reached for her even by accident. When their paths crossed, he altered his course slightly, giving her room to pass without contact. At first, it felt like distance. Then she understood it was care. He was protecting something fragile. And it was not just her. One evening, after a long day that left her hands sore and her mind tired in a good way, she found herself sitting at the table across from him, sharing a meal. The fire burned low. The house held the quiet of two people who did not need to fill it with words. She realized she was no longer counting the hours until sleep. She was present. That realization frightened her. She offered herself that night a habit, the words rising automatically, shaped by years of learned survival. Her voice was steady, practiced, as if reciting something memorized long ago. The room seemed to still around them. He looked at her then, truly looked, and the gentleness in his refusal struck deeper than any demand ever had. He spoke quietly, not accusing, not embarrassed. Not like that, not ever. He told her she was free, that she had always been. She retreated to her room and closed the door, pressing her forehead against the wood, as emotion rose too quickly to name. She cried not from rejection, but from relief so sharp it left her shaking. The refusal had drawn a line she did not know how to draw for herself. For the first time, she understood that being wanted and being respected were not the same thing. After that night, something between them shifted, not into romance but into honesty. She began to speak more freely, allowing small pieces of herself to surface. Stories without detail, feelings without defense. He listened without interruption, without trying to solve what could only be witnessed. In return, he offered glimpses of his own life, careful and unembellished. A woman lost to illness, a promise made and kept, a belief that love, if it came again, must arrive without obligation. The town crept back into her awareness through small moments. A look held too long at the store, a whisper she almost didn't hear. The old shape of judgment tried to settle back onto her shoulders. She felt herself brace, preparing to endure what she always had. He noticed. The next time they went into town together, he walked beside her openly, said nothing, did nothing. His presence was enough. She felt the weight of the stairs lessen, not because the town had changed, but because she had. She was no longer standing alone. That evening, she returned to the porch as the light faded, the road stretching before her. He joined her again, leaving the same careful space. Neither spoke. The silence between them felt full, expectant, as if the land itself were listening. She realized then that safety had begun to grow roots, not the fragile kind that could be pulled up by the first strong wind, but something deeper, fed by patience and choice. Whatever lay ahead would not be simple. The world rarely allowed such grace to go untested. As night settled, she stayed where she was, watching the dark claim the horizon, knowing that the road still existed, that leaving remained possible. And yet, for the first time, staying felt like something more than survival. It felt like the beginning of a life she had not dared to imagine, one that would demand more courage than endurance ever had. The door behind her remained open, light spilling softly into the yard, waiting. Spring did not arrive all at once. It came in small mercies, a softer wind, ground that no longer bit at the soles, a faint green pressing through what had once looked dead beyond repair. She noticed these changes the way she noticed everything now, quietly, as if afraid the world might take them back if she stared too long. She worked beside him more often, not because it was expected, but because it felt right. Their days found a rhythm that required few words. Gates open, fences mended, animals moved with the patient trust of creatures accustomed to steady hands. When they passed tools back and forth, their fingers sometimes brushed, brief and accidental. Each time, both seemed to pause, acknowledging the moment without pressing it further. She began to understand the shape of his silence. It was not emptiness, but restraint. He carried grief the way some men carried weapons, carefully, aware of its power. One afternoon, while standing at the far edge of the land, she asked about the small marker she had seen there, half hidden by grass. He answered without hesitation, telling her about a woman who had laughed easily and worked hard, whose absence had changed the way he measured time. He did not speak of pain, only of promise, of a vow made to never confuse need with love. She listened, honoring the trust in his words. When he finished, neither rushed to fill the quiet. Something had been placed between them, fragile and sincere. Her own past surfaced slowly, like something long submerged. She did not offer details. She offered feelings, the shrinking, the bargaining, the way her own name had once sounded foreign in her mouth. He listened without flinching, without reaching for her, as if touch could solve what only time could mend. In his attention, she felt neither pitied nor examined, simply seen. The town did not forget her as easily as she wished it would. Whispers followed her like dust when she went for supplies. A look here, a mutter there. She felt the old instinct rise, the urge to make herself smaller, quieter, easier to dismiss. It surprised her when that instinct no longer fully owned her. She stood straighter, met eyes she once would have avoided. He noticed the change. The next time they rode into town together, he did not walk ahead or behind. He walked beside her, his presence unspoken but firm. No defense offered, no explanations given. The message was simple. She belonged to herself, and she was not alone. That evening, unsettled by the closeness and by memories that refused to stay quiet, she stood before him in the low light of the fire. The words left her mouth before she could stop them, shaped by old survival, an offer made not from desire, but from fear of losing what felt too good to last. His refusal was gentle, absolute. He told her again that she was free, that what he wanted, if it ever came, would come without purchase or obligation. The clarity of his boundary struck her deeper than any touch. She retreated to her room and cried, the kind of crying that breaks something open rather than down. Days passed after that, steadier than before. The tension between them did not vanish, but it softened, changing shape. It became trust. It became patience. She found herself laughing more easily, the sound surprising her. He smiled more, a quiet thing that reached his eyes. Then the past returned in a form that could not be ignored. The man who had first paid for her rode up the road one afternoon, confidence worn like armor. He carried papers and witnesses, his voice loud enough to gather attention. He spoke of agreements and money and what he believed was owed. The town gathered, eager to watch justification take shape. She stood still, heart pounding, but she did not retreat. When it became clear he expected her silence, she spoke instead. Her voice was calm, steady, shaped by truth rather than fear. She named what had been done to her, the sale, the abandonment, the choice that followed. She did not ask for mercy. She claimed herself. The rancher stepped forward then, not in anger, but in certainty. He spoke of intention rather than ownership, of a woman who stayed because she chose to, of a home built on consent. His words did not challenge the law so much as expose its emptiness when stripped of dignity. The other man faltered. Papers lost their power in the face of truth spoken plainly. He left smaller than he arrived, his witnesses drifting away with him. When the road cleared and the town dispersed, she realized her hands were shaking. He stood beside her without touching, a steady presence. The danger had passed, but its echo remained. That night, as they sat across from each other, the air between them felt different, charged not with fear, but with possibility. The question that lingered did not need to be spoken yet. It was enough to know that whatever came next would be chosen in daylight, with open eyes. Outside, the land rested under the stars, patient as ever, waiting to see what they would become. The land seemed to hold its breath in the days that followed, as if aware that something had shifted and was waiting to see whether it would settle or break. She felt the change in herself, most of all. The fear that had once governed her movements no longer spoke as loudly. It was still there, cautious and watchful, but it no longer decided for her. They moved through their days with a new awareness. Not urgency, not haste, just clarity. What lay between them had been named without being claimed, and that knowledge carried its own weight. He watched her more openly now, not with possession, but with recognition. She returned his gaze without flinching, discovering a steadiness she had not known she possessed. The town, quieter after its brief reckoning, resumed its routines, though something in its posture had changed. Whispers faded faster. Looks lingered less. Truth, once spoken aloud, had a way of rearranging the space it occupied. One evening, as the sky dimmed into deep blue and the first stars appeared, he asked her to walk with him to the far edge of the land. They followed a familiar path, one she had come to associate with memory and honesty. The marker stood there still, modest and unassuming, softened now by spring growth. He spoke without ceremony, told her that he would not ask for what she did not wish to give, that what he felt was not ownership or rescue, but a hope shaped by patience. He said he had learned the cost of mistaking loneliness for love, and he would not make that mistake again. If she chose him, it would be because she wanted a life beside him, not because the world had left her no other shelter. She listened, heart steady, the decision already forming not as a sudden leap, but as a quiet arrival. She told him she was still learning how to trust a future that did not require her to disappear inside it. She told him that staying had begun to feel less like survival and more like intention. The words did not rush. They did not need to. They stood there for a long while, the land stretching endlessly before them, until the night air cooled and the choice between them felt complete without being spoken aloud. The morning she answered him came without announcement. She set 2 cups on the table instead of 1. When he looked up, she met his eyes and nodded. The simplicity of the gesture held more weight than any vow she had ever imagined. He did not smile at first. He simply breathed, as if allowing himself to believe. They chose a small ceremony not out of modesty, but out of respect for what they were building. No erasing of the past, no grand declarations meant to impress a town that had once looked away. Just witnesses enough to stand as proof that this union was entered freely, with clear eyes and steady hearts. When they stood together, there was no sense of being given away. She walked to him alone, her steps sure, her back straight. He did not reach for her until she closed the distance herself. In that moment, the memory of money changing hands lost its power. Whatever had been paid for her in the past had never owned her. What she gave now was hers alone to give. Life did not transform overnight. The ranch still demanded work. The land still tested them. But the days carried a different texture now, woven with shared purpose. Decisions were made together. Silences felt companionable rather than cautious. At night, when the house settled and the world grew quiet, she slept without bracing herself for loss. Sometimes she thought of the words that had once lived in her chest, sharp and resigned. You paid for me. Now do it. They no longer fit the shape of her life. In their place lived something gentler and stronger. You waited. You listened. You stood beside me. As seasons turned, the story of her became something new, told not in whispers, but in example. A woman who chose, a man who waited, a love that did not demand surrender, only presence. If you are listening to this as someone who has ever mistaken endurance for worth, remember this. Love is not proven by what it takes from you, but by what it allows you to keep. The right kind of hands will never ask you to disappear inside them. They will stand beside you, steady and patient, until you are ready to stand there too.